All right, so I always like to put some history behind what is that we're going to be talking about. Obviously, we're going to be building web applications. Right? Notice there's web applications as opposed to websites. Right? Building using the internet as a framework for building applications. Right? Typically, when we think about applications, we think something that is running on a desktop. That is making use of all the resources of the machine that we have in front of us. Now, the web has evolved enough that it is a legitimate framework where we can build an application, right, that it can interact with us. But let's just look at a little bit of the history of the internet. As everybody is aware, the internet is nothing but lots and lots of smaller networks that allow us to communicate amongst lots and lots of little computers, and you have these networks just spanning the entire globe, right? The original intent of the internet, fortunately or unfortunately, was to try and survive another Holocaust, right? World War III. Trying to make a network that would survive bombing. There was no one point of failure, right? That you can bomb the whole, a lot of it, but most of it would be highly redundant, so that you can always have some communication between any two computers, right? So it was a purely military solution, right? To a problem we hoped that never to happen, and it was never intended for commercial use, right? To be used outside of the military. Eventually, it was open to research institutions, universities, and finally for commercial use. But even though it was open to for public use, there was way too many competing standards, right, on how is it that the communication was encoded and how it was transmitted and decoded and whatnot, until they came to an agreement that we're all going to be using TCP/IP, right, of how to share and encode the data between these machines. But it wasn't until the 90s that someone thought of a very novel way of sharing information. Right? Before it used to be that I'm at this machine, and if I know the IP address of a particular machine, I knew that there might be a file system there, and there was a particular document at that file system. I could use FTP or some mechanism to go and ask that machine to please download that copy of that document and copy it locally, just stream it back into my local machine, so I can then, start a viewer, right, and open this document to be able to view it. It was very, very cumbersome, right? Even though, for most of us, there wouldn't be an issue, right? We were used to doing these kinds of things, right? But it wasn't until the 90s that Tim Berners-Lee thought of, hey, well, how can we make this a little easier, and he married the mechanisms of fetching the document, right, with the viewer. I said, well, how can we, let's marry these two things, right? The viewer of the document, right, and also the mechanism that transfers the document between the two machines. He also standardized the formatting of these documents. How do you format it, right? How do you say that you want things big, small, red, green, bold or italic or whatever, right? Whether it's a table or a bullet points, and so he came up with a very, very easy formatting of using HTML, right, as based on XML, which used to be or still is a very common way to transfer or encode data between two machines, right? It's a textual formatting. Right? Anybody can open this document, right, and read it. Right? It's a lot of pointy brackets with a lot of characters, but still it's human consumable. Right? You can open it up and actually edit it, as opposed to previously the encoding was binary, right? It was not meant for human consumptions, right? You couldn't open it and make any sense out of it, but you could definitely open up an ASCII file and type this in, right? And you could actually build something out of it. He also introduced mechanisms that would allow these documents to automatically refer to other documents that lived on the network, right? So that you could refer to documents everywhere. That if you clicked on them, right, it would take you and navigate or automatically download that particular document down, so that you can then view it again. It's very, very, very convenient, right? Originally it was only intended for sharing research data amongst peers. It was never meant for anything else than that, right? But this idea just took off, right, in the early '90s, and quickly, there was a lot of commercial aspects that we wanted to use this technology to very easily, it really lowered the bar of entry, right, into being able to share content on the web, and just exploded, right? Just exponentially, a lot of universities and other institutions were generating just an explosive amount of content, right? And we quickly ran into the limitations of HTML itself, right? Commercial as commercial applications always do. They always look for to push the boundary. Or what else can we do, right? They're looking at this HTML here is static, right? There's no way that it could change over time, right? What if I wanted to represent today's weather, right? If I go and look at this document, it's always going to be the same document. Somebody, to make this dynamic, somebody's going to have to manually come in and edit this every day, right? It's just not scalable. It's not a scalable solution. Could we somehow generate this dynamically? And so there were a lot of solutions that were thought of. One of them was that, a lot of those solutions were all based on the fact of being able to execute some code here on the server that could generate this HTML dynamically, right? Perhaps we could connect it to some weather station or some information that is already being collected anyway, right? In some file format, perhaps. Perhaps we're already storing some atmospheric information and weather information and forecasts already. If we could read that document, or maybe we're storing it in some database, we could dynamically generate this HTML so that today's weather information, the forecast, will be today's and not yesterday's. Yes. So that idea just took off again, right? Then there was an explosion of all sorts of dynamic content on the web, right? Of being able to generate this dynamically, right? So it was just opened a lot of possibilities of what to do there. But all of them based on the idea of being able to execute things on the server, right? The browser would request some content, right? And based on some parameters, it would provide you with different content depending on who came, right? If somebody came here from one zip code, they would get the weather for that zip code. If somebody came here from some other zip code, they will get the weather from that other zip code. Make sense? And that was great. Another great advancement came when folks started to get annoyed of having to always type the same zip code. Every day I come here, I type this zip code, right? And you give me something dynamic. That's great, but why do I have to always tell you that zip code? Is there a way for you to remember that it's me again? Right? Why do I need to let you know it's me again? It's me again. It's me again. So HTML didn't support any tracking, any session management of being able to remember or even being able to distinguish one client, right, one request from another request. Right? The server had no way of saying, oh, it's you again, or that, or the other, right? So it was always the same response even if it came from two different places, unless you provided additional information of where it came from, right? The context, but the zip code is the context. Make sense? So how can we do this? So the idea came that well, how about if the server and the browser could agree that that I'm going to provide you some information, right, so that next time I come around, if I provide you the same information, automatically, you can remember that it's me again, right, without me having to tell you over and over and over, right? They came up with the idea of cookies, right, of a server. When it saw a new request coming from a client, the server would dynamically generate an ID, right, that would be sent over to the client to be stored on behalf of the server, right? So that the browser, every time it visited the same server, right, it would provide the same cookie. It says, hey, it's me again, right, without the user having to type their identifying information over and over and over. And that's only if the client agrees to it, right? If the client agrees to it, then the server would know it's the same person. You don't have to type zip code anymore. I can index your cookie against some database in the back end and know that it's still you. And I know your zip code was that yesterday. It should be the same zip code today. Make sense? Right? Those were two big advancements. Another big advancement was that instead of dynamically generating the content here on the server, we started thinking about, well, what about the client? Can the browser generate any dynamic content as well, right? So we started looking at ASP, .NET, and Java applets and JavaScript DOM manipulation, right? All sorts of ideas where the browser, right? Some of the content could be dynamically generated here on the client, as opposed to dynamically generating the HTML, right? Meaning post-process the HTML once it came down to the server. Post-process and manipulate the content there. Those two ideas were met with skepticism, right? Because folks here on the client balked at the idea. Says, what do you mean? You want me to download code from some server and then just run it here on my local machine? That's very dangerous, right? There'd be a security breach. What if I download malicious software that takes over my machine, right? So there was a lot of skepticism, and there was a lot of pushback on even having JavaScript run on the browser and applets run on the browser and all the the ASPs and dynamic components, right? That were buggy, were security issues. But today has become second nature, right? We totally we can't conceive of content today that it doesn't have some form of client-side dynamic content generation, right? First it was the applets, then it became all these recording. Okay, yeah, still recording. Then you have Flash Player and all those, right? Those were all attempts at bringing some of that logic, right, of rendering the content here on the client side, right? Then Apple says that Flash is not supporting on the iPhone, and that's where Flash died. But today you still have a JavaScript still going strong, and JavaScript has become in the last 5 years perhaps the dominant way of dynamically generating content here on the client, right? And having the server take a little backseat on dynamic content generation, right? It used to be that the server did everything, right? It rendered the content, it accessed the database, right? It maintained the session, it did all the really hard stuff, right? Today, applications have been a little more split, right? A little more even, where you maintain the logic, right? All the heavyweight is still being done on the server side. All the data access, all the data model, all the heavy business logic still lives on the server, but all the rendering has moved over to the client side, right? Where instead of rendering dynamic HTML, a string here on the server, instead what we do is that we first download a first approximation of that HTML, and then we progressively, right, using JavaScript, we manipulate the DOM here on the browser, right? And that has become the more dominant architecture today. Okay? And today we refer to these kinds of applications that that render these clients on the client side. We refer to them as single page applications, and we'll see in a minute why. Okay. That makes sense? Okay, so 25 words or less on the history of the internet and the web. Let's talk about single page applications.